Hello and welcome back to Viral Shakespeare. This is Dr. Rusty Jones, and today I'm going to talk about Act 4 of King Lear, and I'm going to use a theme that I think unites Act 4 into a unit, and that theme is miracles. So that's the theme for today, miracles, to tie together Act 4 of Lear. I'm going to do something I haven't normally done, which is I'm going to read some notes off of a screen that's off to the side here that you can't see, because I have a lot to say about miracles before I get into Act 4 itself, and I don't want to mess up or misspeak when I talk about this particular theme. So forgive me if I read some information from off screen here, and I'll throw in some information as I go. So Shakespeare's time was not really big on miracles in the literal sense. With the Reformation of the English Church in 1534, when Henry VIII formally broke away from the Catholic Church in Rome and declared himself the ultimate authority in religious matters, the tradition of visiting the shrines of famous Catholic saints and expecting those saints to perform miracles became a much more problematic venture. So after 1534, Henry VIII began to dissolve England's Catholic monasteries, seizing their property, dismissing the monks, and even further than that, destroying certain Catholic shrines. In 1538, for example, Henry ordered the shrine of Thomas Becket, a shrine which resided in Canterbury Cathedral. He ordered that shrine destroyed, and the saint's bones, if the reports are to be believed, were to be confiscated and ground up into dust. So, whereas soon after Becket's death in the year 1170, churchmen recorded thousands of miracles occurring at Becket's shrine in Canterbury Cathedral, including healing lepers, healing the blind, and believe it or not, even helping people find lost items, which is great. In the time of the Tudor and Stuart monarchs, later, so that's Henry VII, Henry VIII, Elizabeth, and then the Stuart monarch James I after Elizabeth, during their time, such miracles were deemed nothing but schemes by Catholic monks to get money out of the common people who were suffering or perhaps in despair. The closest thing to a true miracle that Queen Elizabeth and her successor James I indulged in was the so-called King's Touch, when the monarch would lay hands on a sick person in order to transfer some of God's divine grace from the monarch into the ill person. But reportedly, this tradition was less common among the Tudors and Stuarts. Elizabeth would, according to reports, basically make the sign of the cross over the sick person, and James was so squeamish that he would just sort of wave his hands over their sores and then dismiss them. So while a true miracle might be frowned upon in Shakespeare's day, the possibility of a miracle is important. If nothing else, the possibility of receiving relief from some of life's ills allows you to endure those very same ills. So yes, maybe false hope is damaging, sure. But hope itself is not necessarily a bad thing. In Alvin Kernan's words, such hope compels the person who has it to stop looking down and to start looking up. And I borrow from Kernan purposely here. I'm borrowing a lot from his work during this lecture, particularly his essay, Miracles in King Lear, and some of his more famous books from the time period or about the time period. Kernan's work is absolutely central. He's a pivotal scholar. There are two very different miracles in Act 4 of King Lear, and hope is at the center of both of them. One is with blind Duke of Gloucester, which is a very theatrical and what Kernan calls a very kind of theatrically awkward miracle, and he's right. And another one with the newly awakened King Lear, which is a very private and a very touching miracle. Although different, both miracles reflect, in a way, the difference between the quarto and the folio versions of the play itself, and I've talked about those differences to some degree. The quarto is, in places, like very similar to older dramatic forms, like, for example, medieval morality plays and medieval miracle plays in particular. Plays that have very strong didactic, instructive lessons intended to teach despairing souls to feel their connection to their fellows and to the divine. Miracle plays from the Middle Ages can be very, very dramatic. They can be full of violence, they're full of magic, they're full of demons, not to mention very, very full of very direct moral instruction, like we see in the quarto version of King Lear, when both Edgar and the servants will stop the action to some degree and come forward and explain the moral lessons to the audience after the audience has just witnessed the action on the stage. On the other hand, Lear's miracle in Act 4 is more like, in my opinion, the folio version of the play, much more ambiguous, morally, and much more personal. This domestic miracle, if I can call it that, is less about any kind of overt, dramatized moral instruction, less directly didactic, less about defeating the demons that are threatening your soul and threatening to impose despair on you, which they represent very, very directly on the medieval stage. And Lear's miracle is more than that. It's more an example of the very kind of individualistic, very kind of caring king's touch that I described earlier, which comes, in this case, in the form of his good daughter, Cordelia, laying hands on her father. Now, during Act 4, she asks for his hands to be laid on her and give her a benediction, but the reality of the situation is it's her influence, it's her physical and her metaphorical hands that help guide him to a kind of reawakening, that help to cure his spiritual blindness, that help to humble his soul and help him to accept his very human weakness and very human vulnerability. So those are the lecture notes about how I see miracles playing out. Let's look at them directly now. So I'm at the very beginning of Act 4 of Lear, and Edgar comes in at the beginning of Act 4 with just a little bit of hope in his soul. He starts the act off by saying, still of course in the disguise of poor Tom the madman, "Yet better thus and known to be condemned than still condemned and flattered. To be worst, the lowest and most dejected thing of fortune, stand still in espérance," which means hope. So to stand as low as you possibly can, you've still got hope that things can get better. "Lives not in fear, the lamentable change is from the best. The worst returns to laughter." In other words, I'm at my lowest point, but that's not a bad thing because I can only go up from here. Well, then an old man comes in with his blind father, Gloucester, and Edgar realizes to some degree that he has been whistling in the dark, that you could think yourself at the bottom, but there is in fact lower that you can sink. The old man says to Gloucester, "I'm helping you out here. You cannot see your way." And Gloucester responds with, "I have no way and therefore want no eyes. I stumbled when I saw." He has completely lost espérance. He's completely lost hope. He is deep in despair, and the Latin root of despair means a lack of hope. "I stumbled when I saw" is a nice little ironic statement from Gloucester. When I had my eyes and when I could see, I didn't understand that Edgar was my good son. I was blinded. I was blinded morally. I was blinded spiritually. I was blinded about my family because of my own stupidity. And he does, at line 21, lament the loss of dear Edgar. "O dear son Edgar, the food of thy abused father's wrath, might I but live to see thee in my touch," which is all he's got left, "I'd say I had eyes again." The old man then identifies Edgar as poor Tom. Edgar tells the audience, in another kind of moral aside here, exactly what I said about the fact that when you think you're at your lowest, you can in fact sink lower. "O gods, who is it can say I am at the worst? I am worse than ever I was." And a little farther down, "And worse I may be yet. The worst is not so long as we can say this is the worst." As long as you can say this is the worst, it's probably not. It can get worse, particularly in this morally bankrupt universe, so far anyway, before the miracles, that Lear and company are in. His despair gets to the point, Gloucester's I should say, where he has lost all faith, not only in miracles, but in the power of grace at all. Top of page 227, Act 4, Scene 1, line 36. "As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport." So the comparison there is between little boys that basically destroy flies because they want to and they think that it's fun, and the gods who destroy humanity for no other reason than they think it's fun. That really may be his moral low point. And Edgar recognizes that and sets himself the task of bringing hope at whatever level he can back to his blind father's despairing soul. Gloucester asks poor Tom, aka Edgar, to take him to Dover, where he intends to commit suicide by throwing himself off the high cliffs. Jumping forward, Act 4, Scene 3. I've mentioned this before to you all. In the quarto version, we have Enter Cordelia with a doctor. In the quarto version, you've got a Cordelia who is very kind and nurturing, and she's coming back with a doctor to cure her crazy daddy. Great, I get that. In the folio, however, which is the one that I'm working from here, Act 4, Scene 3, enter with drum and colors Cordelia, gentlemen, and soldiers. She has come back at the head of an army. This is a very, very different Cordelia. Which one do you want? Most productions that I've seen these days tend to hedge their bets, and they have her come in with both a doctor and an army. That way you can have both the nurturing Cordelia and you can have the kick-ass army general Cordelia. And in this case, though, it's definitely her coming back to militarily defeat her sisters, and she doesn't know Edmund is behind her sisters, but to defeat them all and to restore her father to political power. She says, Cordelia, at the beginning of Act 4, Scene 3, alack, 'tis he. Why, he was met even now as mad as the vexed sea, singing aloud, crowned with rank fumiter and furrow weeds. So she's seen him. She knows that Lear has gone crazy. And she is there both to take back England and to help her father. And he is, in fact, crazy. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this, but if you jump forward to Act 4, Scene 5, about line 108, we do see Lear's madness, and a lot of that madness is expressed in the form of misogyny. He is furious with women. That is still the source that he blames because he has not had the miracle or his awakening. Let's see. In talking about women... well, first he talks about adultery, but then he talks about daughters. And he says, let's see, behold yon simpering dame. This is about line 116, Act 4, Scene 5. Behold yon simpering dame, whose face between her forks presages snow, that minces virtue and to shake the head to hear of pleasure's name. Look at the woman here who looks so virtuous, and yet, oh, she cannot hear anything about anything that's not virtuous. Oh, no. The fit shoe nor the soiled horse goes to it with a more riotous appetite. Down from the waist they are centaurs, though women all above. But to the girdle do the gods inherit beneath. Is all the fiends. There's hell, there's darkness, there's the sulphurous pit. So they seem like they're angels until you get down to their reproductive organs. Then there's nothing but satanic evil, centaur-like from there down. He is still blaming women and has gotten to the point where he's able to utter such horrible misogynistic rhetoric. Jumping back, though, Act 4, Scene 5, about line 11 or so, Edgar has brought his father to the dizzying heights of the Dover Cliffs and tells us in Act 4, Scene 5, about line 35 or so, why I do trifle thus with his despair is done to cure it. Why does it seem like I'm just basically playing a game with my father, pretending to take him to the Dover Cliffs, pretending to stand here while he throws himself off a cliff that isn't there? Why am I going through this gigantic, theatrical, dramatic, almost medieval miracle play exercise? I'm doing it because I want to cure his despair. So I'm pretending that I've brought him to a cliff so he can commit suicide and his soul will be damned forever because suicide is a sin, but that's not what's going to happen at all. Page 237, Act 4, Scene 5, about line 41, Gloucester bids farewell to poor Tom. He ends with a blessing to Edgar, so he doesn't actually know that he is in fact blessing Edgar while Edgar is standing right there. If Edgar live, oh bless him. Now, fellow, fare thee well. Gone, sir, farewell, says Edgar. Gloucester falls forward. When you see this on stage, Kernan's right. It's not only just awkward, it's potentially downright silly. He's standing there, he thinks he's on the Dover Cliff, and then, okay, farewell, boop, and he falls over. And audiences quite frequently will giggle at this. And Edgar turns to us directly after this little silly moment and says, and yet I know not how conceit may rob the treasury of life when life itself yields to the theft. Had he been where he thought, by this had thought been past. And then he takes on another persona. Alive or dead, ho you sir, friend, hear you sir, speak. And he begins to pretend that he's the person at the bottom of the cliff who's just discovered Gloucester perfectly fine after such a gigantic, long fall that should have ended in his death if in fact he had been in Dover. Gloucester, away and let me die. Edgar, pretending to be someone else, hadst thou been aught but gossamer feathers, sir, or so many fathom deep down precipitating, thou'd shiver up like an egg. Even if you'd have been a feather falling from that height, you would have broken like an egg, he says. But thou dost breathe, hast heavy substance, bleedest not, speakest, art sound. 10 masts at each make not the altitude which thou hast perpendicularly fell. Thy life's a miracle. Gloucester just wants confirmation. But have I fallen or no? From the dread summit of this chalky bourne, says Edgar, pretending again to be someone else, look up a height. Gloucester says, alack, I have no eyes. I cannot look up from the height I fell. I owe you to tell me about the miracle. Give me your arms, says Edgar. Up so. How is it? Feel you your legs? You stand. Too well, says Gloucester. Edgar, this is above all strangeness. Upon the crown of the cliff, what thing was that which parted from you? A poor unfortunate beggar, says Gloucester, thinking again of poor Tom. And Edgar begins to spin out the theatrical tale, which brings it very close to morality tales and miracle tales from the medieval period. He spins this tale of demons that tempted Gloucester to the cliff so that his soul would be damned through suicide. As I stood here below, methought his eyes were 2 full moons. He had 1,000 noses. Horns whelped and waved like the enraged sea. It was some fiend. Therefore, thou happy father, think that the clearest gods, who make them honors of men's impossibilities, have preserved thee. Don't look down the cliff, look up. The gods have preserved you. Think yourself the benefit of grace. You avoided the monster, the demon that tried to kill you and take away your hope, which would have damned your soul. I do remember now, says Gloucester, henceforth I'll bear affliction, till it do cry out itself, enough, enough, and die. That's about as good as you can get. I'll put up with the afflictions that life throws at me until finally I say enough and die. I will bear the miseries that I am facing because I do understand I have some hope because I have had the experience of some miraculous grace. The thing you speak of, I took it for a man. Often 'twould say, the fiend, he led me to that place. Edgar says, bear free and patient thoughts. Free and patient. That's the thing that's going to give him just enough despair, to fight despair and keep going through this life until we find out in Act 5 that his heart will burst smilingly, that he will have some acknowledgement of the possibility of grace, the possibility of hope, the possibility of a miracle, that maybe he can, in fact, look at life as anything other than seeing himself as a fly and the gods basically pulling his wings off. The next miracle, the one I described, I should also point out on page 241, when Gloucester does talk to Lear, Act 4, Scene 5, about line 146, Gloucester says, he reveals what he's actually learned here from this theatrical, medieval kind of experience that he's gone through with Edgar. Yet you see, says Lear at line 145, yet you see how this world goes, says the crazy Lear to Gloucester, and Gloucester says, I see it feelingly. Not only that I don't have eyes, but now I feel. Now I understand my comradeship with my fellow humans. Now I understand the grace that is possible from God. I see the world feelingly. I no longer view the world in an adversarial way. I feel it, and I feel the connection that I have. So that was important to point out to you. And now we get to Lear's more private miracle. The one I described is similar to the King's Touch. This is Act 4, Scene 6, about line 12. Cordelia, who has found her father, has brought him back to the encampment. He has been sleeping for a very long time. This is a kind of metaphorical death, that when Lear awakes, his madness is gone, is purged, and he begins to understand something about his connection, not only to his child, but to the world in general, his vulnerability, his weakness as an old man, the fact that everybody doesn't owe him the entire world. There is a certain availability of grace, and he needs to humble himself before it. Gentleman says, Madam, sleep still. He's still asleep. O you kind gods, cure this great breach in his abused nature, the untuned and jarring senses. O wind up of this child changed father, meaning that her sisters changed him. Well, he also sort of changed himself, but fine. The prayer goes out to the gods, and it's going to be answered. That's basically what happens. Enter Lear sleeping in a chair, about line 23 or so. About line 39 or so, Cordelia says, To the gentleman's servants, he wakes. My father is waking up. Speak to him. And the gentleman replies with, Madam, do you, 'tis fittest. I'm always curious about that. Like, why Cordelia wants the gentleman to wake Lear up. And I think the answer's pretty simple. That's her being a child. She has been exiled, scorned, attacked, debased by her father. Who wants to go through that again? She doesn't know that he's been awakened, that his spirit's been renewed, that his madness has been cleared. She has no idea, so she's terrified, as any child, no matter how old you are, would be. How does my royal lord, says Cordelia, how fares your majesty? Very kingly address, which she doesn't deny him. Lear says, you do me wrong to take me out of the grave. He thinks, you've revived me from the dead. It's a kind of mini miracle in the way. He's a Lazarus, awakened to the possibility of grace. Thou art a soul in bliss. You're a soul in heaven. But I am bound upon a wheel of fire that mine own tears do scald like molten lead. I am in hell, and it's my own tears that are scalding. He has been so terrified of tears before, but now they act as a kind of acknowledgement of the wrong he's done, and to some degree a kind of rejuvenation. Sir, do you know me, says Cordelia. Lear, you are a spirit, I know. Where did you die? Cordelia, still far wide. He's not there yet. Lear, where have I been? Where am I? Fair daylight? I am mightily abused. I should even die with pity to see another thus. He had mentioned pity as he was going mad before they went into the hovel. Pity is back again. He's come to this understanding, this empathy for others. I know not what to say. I will not swear these are my hands. Let's see. I feel this pinprick. Would I were assured of my condition. He pricks himself with a pin in order to remind himself of his humanity, that he is not, in fact, he's not dead, but he's in fact a human and liable to all the weaknesses and distresses that we all are. But I'm very, very curious, and always have been, about where he gets this pin. Does he get it out of his own clothes? Possibly. Does he take it from a gentleman? Seems unlikely. I love the idea, and I don't know if this is true or not, that he takes the pin maybe from his daughter's hair. Maybe. It's such a gentle kind of, family kind of moment that she's the one that gives him the evidence of his humanity. And he takes the pin from her hair, from her clothes, whatever it is. It's a very sort of father-child moment. That's kind of where we're going with this. Oh, look upon me, sir, says Cordelia, and hold your hand in benediction over me. There we go. There's the king's touch again. You must not kneel, which tells you exactly what's happening. She's standing, he's kneeling. He understands the humility that he should have had from minute one, that he just now has realized, as a person who's been stripped down to nothing, very literally, that this is exactly what he must do, especially if he's going to get forgiveness. Not give forgiveness, he doesn't deserve that. Get forgiveness, particularly from Cordelia. Pray do not mock me, I am a very foolish, fond old man. Eureka! He sees it. 80 and upward, more than 80. Not an hour more nor less. And to deal plainly, I fear I am not in my perfect mind, which is kind of ironic because he's much more in his perfect mind than he has been. Methinks I should know you and know this man. Yet I am doubtful, for I am mainly ignorant what place this is, and all the skill I have remembers not these garments. Nor I know not where I did lodge last night. Do not laugh at me, for as I am a man, I think this lady to be my child Cordelia. He recognizes it and says, you're my child. He has reaccepted her. It's so touching. And so I am. Be your tears wet. Yes, faith, I pray, weep not. Okay, are your tears wet? He has to touch her. He has to have this personal moment of connection. Yes, they are, but don't weep, he says. And I do think it's interesting that he calls her you. He does not call her thou, he calls her you. It is an honorific title that she should be calling him. As the father, he should say thou to her. He says you to her. It's a sign of respect. If you have poison for me, I will drink it in order to make amends. I know you do not love me, for your sisters have, as I do remember, done me wrong. You have some cause to hate me, she says. He says, they, the sisters, have not. Well, that's arguable. Maybe they do. But he does recognize that he is wrong, Cordelia. No cause, she says, no cause. The power of forgiveness that Shakespeare is going to look into much more deeply in the romances like The Tempest You see it here. Cordelia forgives. Am I in France? In your own kingdom, sir. Do not abuse me. I'm not king anymore. I've given it up. This is not my kingdom. I recognize that. Please don't mock me over that. The gentleman says, Be comforted, good madam. The great rage you see is killed in him. Desire him to go in. Trouble him no more till further settling. Cordelia, will it please your highness walk? Lear, you must bear with me. I love that because it's multi-leveled. It's both, you must endure a foolish fond old man, and you must literally help him to walk. An acknowledgement of his weakness, an acknowledgement of his vulnerability, and a connection, finally, with a family member that's real. You must bear with me, pray you now, forget and forgive. I am old and foolish. And they leave together. The tragedy is the togetherness that he has finally come to on very kind of real, very kind of human terms is too late. If this is one of Shakespeare's romances, it would not have been. But here it is. And that is what I want to talk about with regard to Act 4. Stay safe, stay well, and I will see you again soon. Thank you for joining me.